What's going on, everybody? Westworld is back. March 15th. I am pumped. We're going to do this video. I got another video coming out that's going to cover everything from season 1 and 2, Westworld, the story so far. So enjoy the video, and I will see you soon. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to TopShelf Fandom. I'm your host, Justin Thomas. Today, we're going to be diving into the Westworld Season 3 teaser, as well as some of the supplemental content in which we've been given over the last months. Make sure to subscribe if you've not already, and hit that like button. Let's jump right into this one. So this teaser gives us a better understanding of the world that we're about to jump into, and this is actually pretty smart. It's done in, yes, a non-conventional and abstract way, but then again, this is Westworld. I have no issues with it. So before we jump into Incite, the other supplemental content in which we've been given, let's jump into what these events are just by laying them out and what they lead us to believe about the state of the world. Simply take inventory about what we've learned from this teaser, and then we're going to jump into an in-depth conversation about what does this mean, why did they choose to show us these events, and how does this play into the overall narrative. So let's jump into it. So the events are as following: the impeachment of the 45th president, which would be Donald Trump. This is our timeline. This is 2018. Did happen. Now, it is important to remember that impeachment doesn't mean kicked out of office. It means, in layman's terms, it's essentially the House has put the president up for review. It's up to the Senate to decide now whether or not they need to leave office. I know a lot of people know this, but I do see a lot of people coming to the conclusion that Trump is out of office at this point. We don't know. Maybe they'll allude to this. We don't know if Trump is even the president in this world. This is alternative history per se, but it's just something to keep in mind that this is a real world event that did happen. That does not mean that he will leave office or has to leave office. It's not a great thing, but it is what it is. So then we have the riots in Hong Kong, which also happened in our real world, and they haven't stopped, unfortunately. This happened after Taiwan wanted to extradite a man who supposedly committed a murder. But allowing to extradite to Taiwan would also allow to extradite to mainland China. This caused a lot of issues, especially because this would allow China to get their hands on people, especially those in Hong Kong, who have fled mainland China out of fear either for their lives or for their just basic human rights. So this both shows domestic and foreign dissent. Both the American president's impeachment and the issues in Hong Kong, which both, again, are real world events that have already happened and still happening in our world, and also very on brand for Lisa Joy and Jonathan Nolan. Then we see the ecological disaster in Indonesia, which is a commentary on global warming. This is likely to be a tsunami, and this has not happened so far in our timeline in Indonesia, at least to my knowledge, but you can't argue that right now we are seeing a series of ecological disasters. So they've already touched on the political as well as the ecological aspects of this world. So next up, we see the president-elect is assassinated in Buenos Aires. This is in Argentina. This probably, just off the top of my head, would be due to maybe the United States' history of fuckery in Latin America. But let's not get political, just so we know what this would do, since this would put the vice president-elect into power unless there was time to hold another election. So now, after this, it's stated that France incurs a thermonuclear disaster. Happens after the assassination, so we do have to consider the assassination would have a possible tie if one leads to another, especially since they just chose to give us these isolated events. So they're depicting this world through these events. Think about if you had 50 years that you needed to sum up in 6 events. Which events would you pick? But in my opinion, this is probably more likely to be a Chernobyl than a Hiroshima, meaning it was a thermonuclear meltdown, not an attack. Nonetheless, another ecological, meaning environmental issue. So we find out about the political state as well as where the environment is at. So who is in power and what type of world is this, both politically and environmentally? This is followed by then a second Russian Revolution and a civil war, which I found to be very interesting. This is the only one I'm not as well versed in, surprisingly, because I am unclear about the ins and outs of the current government. I know probably more than anybody should know about the first civil war, during and then after World War I, when you have the forming of the Soviet Union. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the faction would hypothetically be in the present, nor especially the future. Let me know in the comments below if anybody has any insight into Eastern European politics. Then we have the new system that's put into place. This is referred to as the Solomon Build 00.6, and this is almost 20 years this goes on without any disruption, and I have to believe Dolores, or the hosts, are responsible because it is a 5-year gap between the hosts getting out of the park. And then when this happens, there is a time jump. Lisa Joy did cite this right after season 2 aired. There'll be a slight time jump between 2 and 3. And I think that they've been outside for 5 years. And I do have a graphic up here that shows that the host uprising did in fact happen in 2052. This was a cam shot from the security cam that was on the official Delos website, which they later then X'd out that date, but nonetheless was the date.
For the first time, history has an author, a system. And up until very recently, the system was working. But there's someone we haven't accounted for. You?
So the events that we've just witnessed have showed us a world that isn't put together, a world that is at each other's throats. Well, I mean, that's nothing new, right? That's essentially what it always seems to be. So how can we take this and what should we interpret this as? What is this world that we're about to be introduced to? Well, I think the pairing of Incite is very telling to what they're getting at here, because there is an idea. It's called a convergence theory. And the idea behind that originally was, or the sociology behind it, was that there was going to be the rapid industrialization as there was. And as a industrialized nation, say Russia and then United States, as they would further their industry and they would get to about the same level of ability, and they would all be sharing by default at these same traits, thus bringing a unified world. It's like globalization, not just a globalized economy, but a globalized culture and society. I believe in certain aspects of that, and we'll get around to why it connects to this in a moment. But the issue with that is, well, first off, it's a purist approach because it doesn't concede to any issues with the theory. So, I mean, there's going to be aspects of that that aren't going to work well, especially for underdeveloped countries. You'd likely see an increase in the have and have not. So now, when you factor in artificial intelligence into this, is Incite's tagline, choose us and it's the only decision you have to make. Essentially, that's Adam not pulling the apple off the tree of knowledge, giving up your free will, having everything determined for you. And it can be tricky. So when dealing with the idea that the more advanced we get, the more unified we get, we definitely see a separation in that. And we definitely see that when we have what is unifying us become sentient. But another thing to take note of is Incite not only say they have divergences, but Incite is not Incite as in INSIGHT. It's INCITE right there. So Incite, have you ever heard it used without a negative connotation? No, it's always in the dictionary. It says incite violence. Omniscient, it technically is not a word that has to be aligned with anything malicious, but you rarely hear somebody say they incited a good educational foundation or they incited good behavior. No, you incited violence. You incited a riot. You incited this, that, and the next thing that's not good. So now what was used to be used for the data collection was the parks within the camera, but the hosts themselves. And then you had the Forge, which is all stored, but it can be stored within the host, as we see it is with Peter Abernathy. So speaking with Hag's Dogma earlier, friend and collaborator, and on that note, good news, Before the Dust Settles will be back this year for all 8 episodes of Westworld. Me and Hags will be the main hosts every episode, and then we'll have WXL Foley from Westworld Theorycast and Daily DVR in that third seat for a lot of the episodes, and then we'll have a few special guest hosts as well. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. But I was running by some of these tech aspects with him because I was theorizing about what this all means, what Project Solomon was. I mean, it seems to be utilized for societal control. And it seems to be dictating what people do, just like how we've been talking about. So he had not had the chance to do a deep dive into it yet, but did mention that he took it as Solomon is a project that was trying to give humans the edge with predictive technology, which, you know, I think it definitely, you know, right on the money like he usually is. And so the way I'm going with it is that I took it a step further. Hosts are conduits for the information. They hold it in the Pearl. They can, you know, keep the actual conversations digitally recorded. A number of ways in which they can collect human DNA, as we know, and all this. It says right there on the terms and conditions when you enter the park that, you know, anything you do during those 3 days, even the stories that you tell the bartender drunk at the Mesa, are the property of Delos. So obviously they're data mining. So what does this mean when they go out into the world? Well, number one, they are now something that is akin to, at a base level, Facebook by data mining and the ability to, if they can get to the headquarters, use Bernard. They can put this into the system. The hosts work as the conduits for the information that feeds the database. I'm assuming that's the Solomon build. So now it is compromised. So we all know that there was a little bit more than just the data mining. They're also trying to recreate people, so selling immortality and, you know, making sure their dice rolls were the best possible, had the best possible chances is essentially what they were doing with this. And it does look like Solomon hadn't failed in a while. They started it in 39, and all those dates of divergences were before the Solomon build. So we can go into this world knowing that it is highly, highly influenced by predictive technology and deep thinking, as well as a number of different surveillance. So this is a security state. This is a society in which you definitely have a number of people that don't feel like they have identities or agency over their life. They make a lot of decisions for people. This is population control. This is societal control, everything. So when we look at this and we look at what Incite is saying, they're saying that, you know, we'll be your only choice. It's really just, it's not advantageous for society, but definitely advantageous for those in power. Now, Dolores has brought Bernard with her, and we know that Dolores is going to meet up with Aaron Paul's character. He does seem to be a human, but what we see in the trailers is Bernard going and retrieving Maeve, seemingly. Getting out of context scenes, but we've got a little bit of a narrative here, at least a structure. I think that what is going to be happening here is this is a season that there is a lot of power, because what happens if these hosts start collecting data? And yes, they're not the only means to do it, but they are definitely one of the best. And also they have an agenda now, and they can connect to the system. Dolores has sent out other information elsewhere. They have Charlotte with them. They don't know that Charlotte is not Charlotte, so they could get on the inside. And what happens if they start compromising this even further by feeding the information into the system, into the Solomon build, if that is what it is? I'm putting my money on yes. And then essentially the thing that used to make decisions for you in the sense of your shopping and living habits and political views is now going to maybe end your life. So I could see Bernard not agreeing with that, but if Dolores does want to kill them, that is what she would be doing. And also we see them connecting with other artificial beings. We see a riot control robot, or whatever you'd like to call it. It is a machine, and that is, again, they have set themselves up to be crushed because they've depended so much on technology, and there's a strong narrative here. We have a realistic insight into what it might look like if we become too dependent on tech. You know, I mean, if always a downside to any situation. If everything runs off of electricity, what happens if somebody grid? There's all of these situations in which you are going about it with good intentions, but again, those good intentions are what paves the road to hell. So I think that what we're dealing with here most likely is going to be Dolores taking a very hard approach to attacking the people that are behind Incite. And I think there might be a little bit more. I don't think Incite would be the only thing there, the face of it, but we're finally starting to see the Shadow Corporation. Bernard is probably not going to be agreeing with the way in which they've been used either. I can't see that Bernard would agree with Incite by any means. I just don't see that. So there's a number of ways to have conflict ensue in your story. It doesn't need to be people going against each other to stop them from what they do. A lot of times it's stopping somebody from doing what they're doing, how they're doing it. That's what I see happening here. Dolores is going to have too hard of an approach, as always. Maeve is going to be needed because Maeve is going to be what brings them together. Also, this is going to blur a lot of lines for people because these hosts are no longer living in a park isolated. Now they're out, and people, both humans and the hosts, are going to have to come to the conclusion, maybe as we should in our society, that the other half aren't all monsters, meaning Aaron Paul's character and Dolores might have a little bit of a relationship that isn't Jimmy, and they're going to have to come to some hard truths, but in some soft ways. You have a whole system that we have to believe that in 2058, this was the host uprising. This is when things started going wrong for them, and it's not just because they had an uprising. It's because they started having their own ideas. So it's nice to have things that know what you like, right? But there is a certain amount of free will that you lose in that process. And let me explain. If something knows that you prefer a certain restaurant, you prefer a certain type of food, that seems harmless, right? At the surface level. But it starts making decisions for you before you come to your own conclusions fully. Okay, you're looking for something to eat, right? And you're searching the internet. So it's going to suggest to you your favorite restaurant. And of course, I mean, yeah, that's fine. And there's really a slim difference between this and having commercials that influence us as well. But this becomes more and more of a problem when our artificial intelligence and all of this data mining, as Incite does, your life is starting to be determined by an algorithm. And yes, you most likely would have picked that restaurant anyways, but you would have came to the conclusion on your own. And there are times that you change your mind. But this also can put you in a place of complacency because it doesn't change. It makes sure that you stay within the parameters in which it's set for you. So Incite is a company in which deals with data mining. They have algorithms in which work with data that is mined, and they set parameters for themselves. They will develop bias already, but once they start having their own goals and ambitions and free will and sentience, all that's that jazz that we made up to prove that we're better, but meaning they are aware of who they are, they're aware that they're conscious, and they aren't determined to do anything. They have agency over their actions. So what happens when the robots that you give this information to start not using this information to figure out which tennis shoes you want to wear, or which Mexican restaurant you want to eat at tomorrow night? What happens when they start to realize that they're going to start forming these parameters, and they're going to start working in a way that is far more malicious? Because guess what? They want to wipe out the human race. This is what's happening in Westworld. We have a Bernard versus Dolores, and he should be keeping her on an even keel, but it's a very convenient that we are introduced to Incite today. Now, I don't want to say that we are going to see Incite as that is like the big shadow company, right? Like we've always heard, and it's finally refreshing to see something else. Like Dalo says, there's what we do here, and there's what they do in the park, and then there's what corporate does. It's it's been said since the first season. So it's nice to see somebody on the other side of that. We know they're powerful. I can't believe that the only thing they do with it is Incite, but Incite is very, very powerful in the sense of they are probably dealing with, from the looks of it, governments. I don't think Incite would be the only thing there, the face of it, but we're finally starting to see this shadow corporation. That's my take on it, is that this is all about this data mining and how we are letting algorithms run our lives, and how we're being told what to think and what to do when we think it's empowering, and it's really not. We're being objectified, and we might as well be in a park. It's a little bit hyperbolic, I know, but I truly do believe that this is definitely a dangerous situation. Again, man, imagine if your Alexa started to try to kill you. But anyways, I'm Justin Thomas. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to get on Patreon and support me. And I will see you guys soon.
We are in the middle of a war. No one knows it's happened yet, or that it's already been lost. For the most part, humanity has been a miserable little band of thugs stumbling from one catastrophe to the next. Our history is like the ravings of a lunatic. Chaos. But we've changed that. For the first time, history has an author, a system. And up until very recently, the system was working. But there's someone we haven't accounted for. You?
world is complex, complicated, messy. But life doesn't have to be. The future is powered by you, and we know you. Incite is different. We're not Silicon Valley vaporware. We have unprecedented computing capabilities, analyzing data for life's most unsolvable problems. We can protect our climate, and we can find you a career you can be excited about. The possibilities are limitless. But with Incite, the only choice you'll have to make is us.